The sirens were getting closer, but not close enough. I sat on our kitchen floor, my back against the cabinet where we kept the good china, watching my mother's chest rise and fall in shallow, desperate breaths. Her lips had turned that shade of blue you never want to see on someone you love. 12 minutes. That's how long I'd been waiting since I called 911. 12 minutes of listening to her struggle for air, while the dispatcher's voice kept repeating the same useless phrase through my phone's speaker. "Ma'am, the ambulance is on its way. Please stay calm." Stay calm. Right. Because watching your mother potentially die on a Tuesday evening in suburban Cleveland is the kind of situation where calm comes naturally. But here's what nobody tells you about emergencies. They don't feel like the movies. There's no dramatic music, no slow motion, no perfectly timed heroic moments. There's just you, the sound of labored breathing, and the terrible weight of not knowing what to do next. My name is Sarah Mitchell. I'm 38 years old, and up until tonight, I thought I had my life figured out. I work as a marketing coordinator for a medical device company downtown. I drive a Honda Civic that I bought used 3 years ago. I live in a ranch house on Maple Street that still has the same beige carpet from 1995. I'm single, which my mother reminds me about every chance she gets, though she does it with the kind of loving concern that makes you want to scream and hug her at the same time. Tonight was supposed to be just another family dinner. Mom had made her famous pot roast, the one with carrots that somehow taste better when she makes them even though I use the exact same recipe. My younger brother Jake was supposed to come, but he canceled last minute. Something about his girlfriend having a crisis. Jake's girlfriend always has a crisis. So it was just Mom and me, sitting at her dining room table under that chandelier she bought at a garage sale 15 years ago and never replaced, talking about ordinary things. Work stress, the neighbor's new fence, whether I should finally do something about my kitchen backsplash. The attack came out of nowhere. One moment she was laughing at something I'd said about my boss, and the next she was gripping the edge of the table, her face contorting in pain. At first, I thought she was choking. I jumped up, ready to perform the Heimlich maneuver I'd learned in a CPR class 5 years ago and hoped I'd never need. But she wasn't choking. She was clutching her chest, and her breathing was becoming rapid and shallow. Panic filled her eyes, the kind of panic I'd never seen before. My mother had always been the strong one, the one who handled crises with steady hands and clear thinking. Seeing her afraid made something cold settle in my stomach. "Mom, what's happening?" She couldn't answer. She just pointed to her chest and made a sound I'll never forget, like air being forced through a straw. I grabbed my phone and dialed 911, my hands shaking so badly I almost pressed the wrong numbers. The dispatcher was professional and kind, walking me through questions I couldn't focus on properly. Was she conscious? Yes. Was she breathing? Barely. Did she have a history of heart problems? I didn't know. How could I not know? The house felt different now, charged with an energy that made everything look too bright and too sharp. The family photos on the mantel seemed to be watching us. The clock on the wall ticked louder than it ever had before. Even the refrigerator's hum sounded ominous. I helped Mom to the floor because standing seemed to make everything worse. She was wearing her favorite sweater, the blue one with tiny flowers that she'd had for at least 10 years. Her hair, which she'd colored auburn just last week, was damp with perspiration around her hairline. "The ambulance is coming, Mom. Just hang on." She nodded, but her eyes were starting to look glassy. I could see her fighting to stay focused, fighting to stay present. I'd read somewhere that you should keep talking to people in medical emergencies, keep them engaged. Remember when Jake tried to make scrambled eggs and set off the smoke alarm? You were so mad because he used your good pan and scorched it black. But then you laughed about it for weeks. A tiny smile flickered across her face, gone almost before I saw it. "And what about that time we got lost driving to Aunt Linda's wedding? We ended up at that gas station where the attendant had all those cats, and you bought cat treats even though we don't have a cat. You said they looked hungry." I was rambling now, saying anything that came to mind, desperate to keep her with me. The sirens were definitely getting closer, but Ohio traffic had never seemed more frustrating. Why hadn't I moved her closer to the hospital? Why did we live in a suburb where the nearest emergency room was 20 minutes away? Her breathing was getting worse. Each inhale seemed to require enormous effort, and the blue tint around her lips was spreading. I found myself breathing in rhythm with her, as if I could somehow help by synchronizing our efforts. That's when it happened, the thing that would replay in my mind for months afterward. Mom reached out and grabbed my hand with surprising strength. Her palm was cold and clammy, but her grip was firm. She looked directly into my eyes with more clarity than she'd shown since the attack started. "Sarah," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "Pretend you fainted." I stared at her. certain I'd misheard. What? When they get here, she said, each word separated by a struggle for breath. Pretend you fainted too. Nothing about this made sense. My mother was having what appeared to be a heart attack, and she was giving me instructions about pretending to be unconscious? I opened my mouth to ask what she meant, but she squeezed my hand harder. Promise me. The sirens were on our street now. I could see flashing lights through the front window, casting red and blue shadows across the living room walls. In a few seconds, paramedics would burst through our door and take over. They'd know what to do. They'd save her. But my mother was looking at me with an intensity that cut through everything else. Despite her condition, despite the emergency, despite the chaos, she needed me to understand something. She needed me to promise. Mom, I don't understand what you're asking. Just promise. Please. The sirens stopped. Car doors slammed. Heavy footsteps were coming up our front walk. I could hear voices, professional and urgent, getting closer to our door. I looked at my mother, this woman who had raised me and loved me, and drove me crazy in all the ways mothers do. She was asking something of me that made no sense, but she was asking with the desperation of someone who might not get another chance to ask for anything. I promise, I said. She relaxed slightly, and something that might have been relief crossed her face. The front door opened. I'd given them the entry code when I called, standard protocol in our neighborhood for emergency situations. Hello, paramedics! In here, I called back, though I was already second-guessing everything. Why had I promised something I didn't understand? What was my mother trying to protect me from? Or protect herself from? Two paramedics rushed into the dining room, a man and a woman, both wearing navy blue uniforms and carrying equipment I couldn't identify. They moved with practiced efficiency, immediately assessing the situation. What happened here? The woman asked, kneeling beside my mother and checking her pulse. I started to explain about the sudden onset, the chest pain, the breathing difficulties. But as I spoke, my mother's words echoed in my head. Pretend you fainted. When they get here, pretend you fainted too. The male paramedic was setting up some kind of monitor. Any medical history we should know about? Heart problems, high blood pressure, medications? I'm not sure about her full medical history. She's always been healthy as far as I know. That was a lie, and I realized it as soon as I said it. Mom had been to the doctor more frequently lately. She'd mentioned tests, follow-up appointments, things she'd dismissed as routine when I asked about them. How much didn't I know about my own mother's health? The female paramedic was asking Mom questions now, checking her responsiveness. Mom's answers were brief but coherent. She was stable enough to communicate, which seemed like a good sign. We're going to take you to Metro General, the woman said. It's the closest hospital with a cardiac unit. As they prepared to move her, Mom caught my eye again. She gave me a look that was part plea, part reminder. The promise I'd made was still hanging between us. But I couldn't do it. I couldn't pretend to faint while my mother was having a medical emergency. It seemed selfish and wrong and potentially dangerous. What if I actually needed medical attention too? What if my fake emergency took resources away from her real one? I watched them load her onto a stretcher, professional and careful. Her color was already looking better with the oxygen mask they'd placed over her nose and mouth. The monitoring equipment showed numbers that meant nothing to me, but seemed to satisfy the paramedics. Are you riding with us? The male paramedic asked. I nodded, grabbing my purse and Mom's insurance cards from her wallet. As we walked toward the ambulance, I caught sight of our dinner still sitting on the table. 2 plates with pot roast getting cold, 2 glasses of water with ice melting, 2 napkins folded the way Mom had taught me when I was 7 years old. It looked so normal, so innocent. Like we might come back in an hour and finish eating, maybe watch a movie together afterward. But something told me we wouldn't be coming back to normal anytime soon. The ambulance ride to Metro General took 14 minutes. I sat in a small seat near Mom's head, watching the paramedics work. They'd started an IV and were monitoring her heart rhythm on a portable machine. She was conscious and seemed more comfortable, but I could see the fear still lingering in her eyes. Your mom's vitals are stabilizing, the female paramedic told me. The doctors will want to run some tests, but she's responding well to treatment. I nodded, though I was only half listening. I kept thinking about her request, about the promise I'd broken. When they get here, pretend you fainted too. What had she been trying to tell me? What did she know that I didn't? Metro General's emergency room was exactly what you'd expect from a major hospital on a Tuesday night. Bright fluorescent lights, the smell of disinfectant mixed with coffee, and the constant sound of beeping machines and urgent conversations. They wheeled Mom directly into a treatment room while I dealt with paperwork at the front desk. Insurance information, emergency contacts, medical history questions I couldn't fully answer because I was beginning to realize my mother had been keeping things from me. "Does the patient have a primary care physician?" the intake nurse asked. "Yes, Dr. Williams at Cleveland Clinic." "And when was her last visit?" I had to think about it. "I'm not sure. Recently, I think. She mentioned some appointments." The nurse made notes I couldn't see. "Any current medications?" Another question I should have known the answer to. "I don't think so. I mean, maybe vitamins?" More notes. I was failing some kind of test I didn't know I was taking. After what felt like hours but was probably only 45 minutes, a doctor came to speak with me. Dr. Chen was young, maybe early 30s, with the kind of calm demeanor that either meant everything was fine or everything was terrible, and he'd had practice delivering bad news. "Miss Mitchell, I'm Dr. Chen. I've been treating your mother. How is she?" "She's stable. We've run an EKG and some blood work. The good news is that this doesn't appear to be a heart attack." Relief flooded through me so quickly I felt dizzy. Thank God. What was it then? "We're still running tests, but it looks like it might have been an anxiety attack. A severe one, but not life-threatening." Anxiety attack. My mother, who handled everything from family crises to major home repairs with unflappable calm, had had an anxiety attack severe enough to require emergency medical attention. That doesn't sound like her at all. Dr. Chen consulted his chart. Sometimes anxiety attacks can present with physical symptoms that mimic heart problems. Chest pain, shortness of breath, feeling like you're dying. It's more common than people think, especially in women over 40. "Can I see her?" "Of course. She's been asking for you." I followed him through the maze of hallways to room 12. Mom was sitting up in bed, looking small under the white hospital blanket, but definitely more like herself. The color had returned to her face, and she was breathing normally. "Hey there," I said, trying to sound casual despite everything we'd just been through. "Sarah, thank you for staying with me." I pulled a chair close to her bed. "Of course I stayed." "Are you feeling better?" She nodded, but something in her expression seemed guarded. "The doctor said it was anxiety." Can you believe that? At my age, having panic attacks like a teenager. There's nothing wrong with anxiety, Mom. It can happen to anyone. We sat in comfortable silence for a moment. The room was quiet, except for the soft beeping of monitoring equipment and the distant sounds of the hospital corridor. Through the window, I could see the parking lot where ambulances came and went with their own emergencies. "Sarah?" Mom said finally. About what I said earlier, in the kitchen. Here it was. The conversation I'd been dreading and anticipating since we'd left the house. About pretending to faint? She looked embarrassed. I wasn't thinking clearly. The whole thing was so scary, and I said something stupid. Forget I mentioned it. But I couldn't forget it. The way she'd gripped my hand, the urgency in her voice, the look in her eyes when she'd made me promise. None of that had seemed stupid or confused. It had seemed calculated. "Mom, what aren't you telling me?" She looked away, focusing on the IV tube taped to her hand. "I don't know what you mean." "Yes, you do. You asked me to pretend to faint when the paramedics arrived. That's not something someone says randomly during a medical emergency. You had a reason." The silence stretched between us, filled only by the steady rhythm of the heart monitor. Outside in the corridor, I could hear nurses talking, phones ringing, the normal sounds of a hospital at night. But inside our small room, the air felt thick with unspoken truths. "Sarah, sometimes when people are in pain, they say things that don't make sense." "Stop it, Mom. Stop treating me like I'm still 12 years old. Something is going on, and you're trying to protect me from it. But I can't help you if I don't know what's happening." She finally looked at me, and I saw something I'd never seen in my mother's eyes before. Fear, yes, but something deeper. Shame, maybe, or guilt. "You remember when I started going to Dr. Williams more regularly, about 6 months ago?" I nodded. "You said it was just routine checkups. Getting older, being more careful about your health. It wasn't routine." Her voice was barely above a whisper. "I've been having episodes. Not like tonight, but concerning episodes. Memory lapses, confusion, times when I couldn't remember where I was or what I was supposed to be doing." The words hit me like cold water. "What kind of memory lapses?" "Last month, I found myself in the grocery store parking lot at 10 o'clock at night. I was still in my pajamas. I had no memory of driving there or why I'd gone. The store was closed. I sat in my car for 20 minutes trying to figure out how I'd gotten there." I stared at her, processing this information. My mother, who had always been sharp as a tack, who could remember every birthday, every appointment, every detail of our family history, was having memory blackouts. There was another time. I was making dinner, and I couldn't remember how to use the can opener. It's such a simple thing, something I've done thousands of times, but I stood there holding it like I'd never seen one before. I started crying right there in the kitchen. Mom, why didn't you tell me? Because I was scared. And because I didn't want to worry you until I knew what we were dealing with. What did Dr. Williams say? She took a deep breath, as if gathering courage for what came next. He referred me to a neurologist, Dr. Patterson at Cleveland Clinic. I've been seeing her for 3 months now. 3 months. My mother had been dealing with this alone for 3 months while I complained about my job and my kitchen backsplash and all the trivial things that had seemed so important. What did the neurologist say? We're still running tests, but the preliminary findings suggest early-stage dementia, possibly Alzheimer's. The words seemed to echo in the small room. Alzheimer's. The disease that steals everything you are, piece by piece, until there's nothing left but a shell of the person you used to be. How early stage? Early enough that most of the time, I'm completely normal. You haven't noticed anything, have you? I've been working very hard to make sure you wouldn't notice. I thought back over the past few months, looking for signs I'd missed. Had there been moments when she seemed confused? Times when she'd repeated herself or forgotten things she should have remembered? If there had been, I'd attributed them to normal aging, the kind of minor forgetfulness everyone experiences. The anxiety attack tonight, I said, putting pieces together. Was it related? Dr. Patterson said anxiety often accompanies early dementia. The brain knows something is wrong even when the person can't articulate what it is. It creates a constant state of low-level panic. And the request about pretending to faint? She looked embarrassed again, but this time I understood why. I was afraid that if they took me to the hospital, they'd run tests. That it would all come out before I was ready to tell you. I thought if you were unconscious too, they'd focus on you instead of doing extensive testing on me. Mom, that's stupid, I know, but I wasn't thinking clearly. Fear makes you do irrational things. I reached for her hand, the same hand that had gripped mine so desperately a few hours earlier. Her skin was soft and warm now, no longer cold and clammy from the panic attack. We're going to deal with this together, I said. You don't have to carry this alone anymore. Sarah, you have your own life, your job, your friends. I don't want this to become your burden. You're my mother. You're not a burden. You're the person who taught me how to drive, how to cook, how to balance a checkbook. You're the person who stayed up all night when I had pneumonia in high school, and who helped me move into my first apartment, and who still calls to check on me when there's bad weather. Tears were running down her cheeks now, but they seemed like tears of relief rather than sadness. What's the prognosis? I asked gently. It's hard to say. Early-stage Alzheimer's can progress slowly. Some people maintain their independence for years. Others decline more rapidly. Dr. Patterson wants to start me on medication that might slow the progression. What can I do to help? I need to make some decisions while I still can. Legal decisions, financial decisions. I need to update my will, set up power of attorney, maybe think about long-term care options. The practical side of terminal illness, the paperwork and planning that nobody wants to think about but everybody needs to address. We'll handle all of that. What else? I want to tell Jake, but I'm not sure how. He's got his own problems with Melissa, and he's never been good with serious situations. Jake was 28 and still figuring out his life. The news that our mother had Alzheimer's would hit him hard, but he deserved to know. We'll tell him together, when you're ready. Dr. Chen knocked on the door frame. Sorry to interrupt. Miss Mitchell, we're ready to discharge your mother. The anxiety attack has resolved and her vital signs are stable. What about follow-up care? I asked. She should see her primary care physician within the next few days. And if she's seeing a specialist for any ongoing issues, she should schedule an appointment there as well. He handed me discharge papers and a small packet of information about anxiety attacks and stress management. Standard materials that didn't address our specific situation but might be helpful nonetheless. Thank you for everything, Mom said to Dr. Chen. Take care of yourself, Mrs. Mitchell. And don't hesitate to come back if you have any more episodes. After he left, we sat quietly while Mom got dressed. The hospital gown was replaced by her blue sweater with the tiny flowers, the same sweater she'd been wearing when this whole evening started. It seemed like days ago instead of just a few hours. Are you ready to go home? I asked. Actually, I was thinking, would you mind staying at my house tonight? I know it's a lot to ask, but I'd feel better having someone there. Of course. I'll stay as long as you want. We gathered her belongings and walked slowly through the hospital corridors toward the exit. The emergency room was still busy with its nighttime parade of crises and emergencies. Other families were dealing with their own fears and uncertainties, their own life-changing moments. The ride home was quiet. Mom dozed in the passenger seat while I drove through the familiar streets of our neighborhood. Maple Street looked the same as always, lined with ranch houses and small front yards, porch lights glowing in the darkness. But everything felt different now, charged with new knowledge and new responsibilities. When we pulled into Mom's driveway, I noticed that the dining room light was still on. Through the window, I could see our abandoned dinner, still sitting on the table where we'd left it hours earlier. "I should clean that up," Mom said, following my gaze. "I'll take care of it. You should rest." Inside, the house felt different too. It was the same house I'd grown up in, with the same furniture and the same family photos and the same quirks and imperfections. But now I was seeing it through the lens of Mom's diagnosis. How long would she be able to live here independently? What modifications might we need to make? When would it become unsafe for her to be alone? I cleared the dining room table while Mom changed into her pajamas. The pot roast had congealed into something unappetizing, but I wrapped it up anyway. Food waste had always bothered her, and I wasn't ready to break that habit. "Sarah?" she called from her bedroom. "Yeah? Thank you for everything tonight. For staying calm, for taking care of things, for listening. You don't need to thank me." "Yes, I do. This isn't going to be easy. What's coming next?" "I know I'm asking a lot of you." I walked to her bedroom doorway. She was sitting on the edge of her bed, looking smaller and more fragile than I was used to seeing her. "Mom, do you remember when I was going through my divorce with Robert? When everything was falling apart and I couldn't see how I was going to manage?" "Of course. You told me that family doesn't abandon family, that we show up for each other, especially when things get difficult. That's what love actually means, the showing up part." She smiled, and for a moment she looked exactly like the mother I'd always known. Strong, wise, completely present. "I remember. Well, I'm showing up, and I'm going to keep showing up for whatever comes next." I set up camp on her living room couch, though neither of us slept much that night. Every few hours, I'd check on her, making sure she was breathing normally, making sure she hadn't gotten confused or disoriented. She did the same thing, padding quietly through the house to make sure I was okay. We were both adjusting to a new reality, one where roles might need to shift and change, where the person who had always taken care of everyone else might need taking care of herself. Around 5 in the morning, I found her in the kitchen making coffee, moving through the familiar routine with the same precision she'd had for decades. "Couldn't sleep either?" she asked. "Too much to think about." We sat at the kitchen table as the sun came up, drinking coffee and watching the neighborhood wake up. Mrs. Henderson from next door came out to get her newspaper, wearing the same pink bathrobe she'd had for years. The Johnsons' dog barked at a squirrel. Normal morning activities that felt both comforting and surreal. "What happens next?" I asked. "I have an appointment with Dr. Patterson next Thursday. You could come with me if you want. Hear everything firsthand. I'd like that. And I suppose we should start making plans. Lists of things that need to be done, decisions that need to be made. One step at a time," I said. "We don't have to figure everything out today." She nodded, but I could see her mind already working, trying to organize and prepare for an uncertain future. It was so like her, even in the face of something as unpredictable as dementia, to want to make plans and maintain control. "Sarah, can I ask you something?" "Anything." "Are you angry with me for not telling you sooner?" I considered the question carefully. Was I angry? I was hurt, certainly. Scared, definitely. But angry? "I understand why you didn't tell me. It's terrifying news, and you wanted to protect me from worrying unnecessarily. But from now on, no more secrets, okay? We're in this together. No more secrets," she agreed. The morning light was getting stronger, casting long shadows across the kitchen floor. In a few hours, I'd need to call my boss and explain why I wouldn't be coming to work. I'd need to think about how to rearrange my schedule to accommodate doctor's appointments and caregiving responsibilities. I'd need to research Alzheimer's and early-stage dementia and all the resources available for families dealing with this diagnosis. But for now, I was content to sit in my mother's kitchen, drinking coffee and watching the world wake up, grateful that we'd made it through the night and that we were facing whatever came next together. The ambulance had taken a long time to arrive, but it had brought us to exactly where we needed to be. 3 weeks later, I was sitting in Dr. Patterson's office, holding a manila folder thick with test results and medical terminology I was still learning to understand. Mom sat beside me, her hands folded in her lap, listening as the neurologist explained what the latest scans revealed. "The MRI shows some expected changes consistent with early Alzheimer's disease," Dr. Patterson said, pointing to areas on the brain scan that looked like dark shadows to my untrained eye. "However, the progression appears to be slower than we initially thought. What does that mean in practical terms? I asked. It means your mother likely has several years of relatively normal functioning ahead of her. The medication we started has shown some positive effects in similar cases. Mom had been taking Donepezil for 2 weeks now. The side effects had been minimal, just some mild nausea that seemed to be improving. I feel the same, Mom said. Maybe a little less anxious, but otherwise the same. That's exactly what we want to hear. The goal isn't to make you feel dramatically different. It's to slow down changes you might not even notice yet. Since that night in the emergency room, our lives had settled into a new routine. I'd started working from home 3 days a week, splitting my time between Mom's house and my own. We'd told Jake about the diagnosis the previous Sunday, and he'd taken it better than expected. He'd cried, which surprised me because Jake never cried. But then he'd asked practical questions about what he could do to help. I want to learn everything I can about this, he'd said. I want to understand what's happening to her brain. That was so typical of Jake. When faced with something overwhelming, he dove into research mode. His girlfriend Melissa had actually been helpful, connecting us with a support group for families dealing with Alzheimer's. It turned out she'd helped care for her grandmother through a similar diagnosis. The support group met every Thursday evening in the basement of St. Catherine's Methodist Church on Cedar Avenue. The first meeting had been awkward and emotional, listening to other families share their stories. There was Tom, whose wife of 43 years no longer recognized him. Maria, whose father had started leaving the house in the middle of the night and forgetting how to get home. Robert, whose mother had begun accusing him of stealing from her because she couldn't remember where she'd put things. But there was also hope in that basement room. Strategies that worked, resources we hadn't known existed, and the simple comfort of talking to people who understood what we were going through. Your mother is fortunate to have such a strong support system, Dr. Patterson continued. Family involvement makes a significant difference in how well patients adapt to this diagnosis. We'd made a lot of changes in the past 3 weeks. Mom had agreed to let me handle her finances, though she was still capable of managing them herself. We'd installed grab bars in her bathroom and bought a medical alert system she could wear around her neck. Small modifications that maintained her independence while providing safety nets. The hardest part had been telling her employer. Mom worked part-time at the local library, a job she'd taken after retiring from her career as an elementary school teacher. She loved the work, loved helping people find books and organize community events, but the diagnosis meant she'd eventually need to step back from those responsibilities. I want to keep working as long as I can, she told her supervisor, Mrs. Chen, but I understand if that becomes impossible. Mrs. Chen had been incredibly understanding, offering to reduce Mom's hours and assign her tasks that played to her strengths. The library had become like a second family to her, and they weren't ready to let her go any more than she was ready to leave. After the appointment with Dr. Patterson, we stopped for lunch at Panera, a ritual we'd developed after medical visits. Mom ordered her usual turkey sandwich, and I got the broccoli cheddar soup that reminded me of being sick as a kid. How are you feeling about everything? I asked. Honestly, some days I forget I have this diagnosis. I feel completely normal, completely myself. Other days, I'm hyper-aware of every little thing. Did I forget that word because I'm getting older or because of the Alzheimer's? Did I put my keys in the wrong place because I was distracted or because my brain is changing? Dr. Patterson said that's normal. The uncertainty is almost harder than the symptoms themselves. I've been thinking about things I want to do while I still can, places I want to visit, experiences I want to have. This was new. Mom had always been a homebody, content with her routine and her familiar surroundings. What kinds of things? I want to go back to Maine, to that cabin where we used to vacation when you and Jake were little. I want to see if it's still there, if it still looks the same. The cabin in Acadia. We'd spent a week there every summer for 5 years, until Dad left and everything changed. I hadn't thought about those vacations in years, but suddenly I could smell the pine trees and hear the sound of waves against the rocky shore. I think that's a wonderful idea. When do you want to go? This fall, maybe? Before it gets too cold. Jake could come too if he wants. I'll start looking into rental options. And I want to write letters. To you and Jake, to my sister in California, to some of my old teaching colleagues. Things I want you to know. Stories I want to preserve while I can still remember them clearly. The idea of Mom writing letters because she might forget the stories she wanted to tell was both heartbreaking and beautiful. She was taking control of her narrative while she still could. That sounds like a perfect project. We finished lunch and drove to the grocery store, another part of our new routine. I'd started doing most of Mom's shopping, but she still liked to come along and help with meal planning. Today, we were buying ingredients for a dinner party she wanted to host for Jake and Melissa. I want to cook for them while I still enjoy cooking, she'd explained, before it becomes stressful or overwhelming. The grocery store felt different now, too. I found myself watching Mom more carefully, noticing whether she seemed confused or disoriented. So far, she navigated the familiar aisles with the same efficiency she'd always had. She knew where everything was, remembered what we needed, even caught a mistake I made when I picked up the wrong brand of olive oil. Force of habit, she said, smiling. I've been shopping here for 15 years. At home, we spent the afternoon organizing photo albums. Mom had decided she wanted to label everything while she could still remember the details. Who was in each picture, when and where it was taken, why the moment had been worth capturing. This one is from your 8th birthday party, she said, pointing to a picture of me wearing a pink dress and a paper crown. You insisted on having it at Chuck E. Cheese even though I thought the noise would drive me crazy. But you were so happy that day. I remembered that party. The mechanical animals singing songs, the pizza that tasted like cardboard, the way Mom had smiled and participated in all the games, even though I could tell she was overwhelmed by the chaos. You were a good sport about Chuck E. Cheese. I learned that making you happy was more important than my own comfort. That's what parenting teaches you. We worked through box after box of photos, decades of family history spread across the dining room table. Birthday parties and Christmas mornings, school plays and family vacations, graduations and celebrations. A visual record of our lives together. I'm glad we're doing this now, Mom said. These pictures tell stories I don't want to lose. Around 5 o'clock, Jake arrived with Melissa and a bottle of wine. They'd brought flowers, too, bright yellow sunflowers that Mom immediately put in her favorite vase. How did the doctor's appointment go? Jake asked. Good news, mostly. The progression is slower than they expected, and the medication seems to be helping. Jake looked relieved. He'd been carrying a lot of worry since we'd told him about the diagnosis, though he tried to hide it behind his usual jokes and casual demeanor. Dinner was one of Mom's signature meals. Roast chicken with herbs, mashed potatoes made from scratch, green beans with almonds, and her famous dinner rolls that required 3 hours of rising time. She'd started cooking at noon, moving through the familiar routines with the same precision she'd always had. Everything smells incredible, Melissa said. My grandmother used to cook like this, from scratch with no shortcuts. Cooking is meditation for me, Mom replied. All the chopping and stirring and timing. It requires attention, but not stress. We ate in the dining room under the garage sale chandelier, the same room where Mom had her panic attack 3 weeks earlier. But tonight it felt warm and welcoming, filled with laughter and conversation. Jake told us about his job at the marketing firm downtown. Melissa shared stories about her work as a physical therapist. We talked about normal things, current events and weekend plans, and whether the Browns had any chance of making the playoffs this year. For stretches of time, I almost forgot about the diagnosis. Mom was so present, so engaged, so completely herself. The disease felt like something that might happen in the future, rather than something already changing our lives. After dessert, Mom brought out a photo album we'd organized earlier. I want to show you something, she said, opening to a page of pictures from Jake's college graduation. Look how proud you both look. Jake in his cap and gown, Sarah crying happy tears. I wasn't crying, I protested, though the evidence was clearly visible in the photograph. You were sobbing, Jake said. Mom had to give you tissues during the ceremony. I was proud. My little brother was graduating from college despite spending most of his sophomore year playing video games instead of studying. Hey, I passed all my classes, eventually. Mom laughed, the same laugh I'd been hearing my entire life, rich and genuine and completely infectious. You both turned out better than I expected, she said. Not that my expectations were low, but you exceeded them anyway. Later, after Jake and Melissa had left, Mom and I cleaned up the kitchen together. She washed dishes while I dried and put them away, a division of labor we'd established when I was tall enough to reach the cabinets. Tonight was perfect, she said. I want to remember this evening exactly as it was. Me too. Sarah, can I tell you something? About the night of the panic attack? I stopped drying the plate I was holding. What about it? When I asked you to pretend to faint, I was thinking about control. I was terrified that once medical professionals got involved, I'd lose the ability to manage my own situation. That decisions would be made for me instead of by me. I understand that. But what I realized later is that I don't have to face this alone. Having people who care about me, people who want to help, that's not losing control. That's gaining support. She handed me the last plate, and I dried it carefully before placing it in the cabinet. I'm grateful for that night. As scary as it was, It forced us to have conversations we might have put off indefinitely. Are you still having anxiety attacks? Mild ones occasionally, but they're manageable now. Dr. Patterson said anxiety often decreases once people start treatment and feel like they have a plan. Do you feel like we have a plan? We have the beginning of a plan. And we have each other. That feels like enough for now. The next morning was Saturday, and we drove to Jake's apartment to help him move some furniture. He'd finally decided to get rid of the futon he'd had since college and invest in an actual couch. Mom had offered to help him pick something out, claiming she had better taste than he did. I want something that will last, Jake said as we walked through the furniture store. Something I can keep for years. That sounds very mature of you, Mom replied. Are you sure you're the same person who once ate cereal for dinner 3 nights in a row because you were too lazy to cook? People change, Mom. I'm practically a responsible adult now. I'll believe it when I see evidence. They bantered back and forth while testing different couches, and I found myself memorizing the sound of their voices, the rhythm of their conversation. How long would we have this? How long before the disease changed the dynamic between them? But then I caught myself. This kind of thinking, this constant awareness of time running out, wasn't helpful for any of us. Mom was still Mom. Jake was still Jake. Today was still today. And today was good. We found a couch Jake liked, a gray sectional that would fit well in his small living room. While he dealt with the paperwork and delivery arrangements, Mom and I browsed the home accessories section. I've been thinking about redecorating, she said, examining throw pillows. Nothing major, just refreshing some things, making the house feel more intentional. What kinds of changes? New curtains in the living room, maybe paint the guest bedroom a different color. Small projects that would make me happy. I understood what she was really saying. She wanted to enjoy her space while she could still fully appreciate it. She wanted to create an environment that brought her joy for whatever time she had left. That sounds like a great idea. I could help with the painting. I'd like that. We could make it a project. The drive home was quiet, each of us lost in our own thoughts. The morning had been normal and pleasant, exactly the kind of experience I was learning to appreciate more fully. No medical crises, no difficult conversations, no reminders of the challenges ahead. Just a mother and her adult children buying furniture and spending time together. That afternoon, I worked in Mom's garden while she read on the back porch. October was mild that year, warm enough to work outside but cool enough that the physical labor felt refreshing rather than exhausting. Mom had always kept a beautiful garden, roses and perennials arranged in careful color combinations that bloomed from spring through fall. But she'd been neglecting it lately, overwhelmed by medical appointments and the mental energy required to process her diagnosis. The roses need pruning, she called from her chair. I'm working on them. Do you want to supervise? I trust you. You learned from the best. She had taught me to garden when I was 12, showing me how to deadhead flowers and pull weeds and divide perennials in the fall. Patient lessons delivered on summer mornings before the heat became unbearable. Mom, do you remember teaching me about the roses? Of course. You were so careful with the pruning shears. You asked a million questions about which branches to cut and which ones to leave. I was afraid I'd kill them. I told you that roses are tougher than they look, that you can cut them back pretty severely and they'll come back stronger the next year. Good advice for roses and people. Exactly. As the sun began to set, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink, I finished cleaning up the garden beds. Mom had dozed off in her chair, the book still open in her lap. She looked peaceful, and for a moment I could almost forget about everything we were dealing with. But forgetting wasn't the goal anymore. Accepting was the goal. This was our reality now. A mother with early-stage Alzheimer's, a daughter learning to be a caregiver, a family adapting to new challenges while holding on to what mattered most. The ambulance had taken a long time to arrive that night 3 weeks ago, but it had brought us to a place of honesty and connection we might never have reached otherwise. Sometimes emergencies, even the scary ones, redirect us toward what really matters. I woke Mom gently as the street lights began to flicker on. Ready to go inside? Already, it feels like I just sat down. You've been napping for an hour. Time moves differently when you're comfortable. We gathered her book and the empty iced tea glass and headed into the house. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new adjustments, new moments of both difficulty and grace. But tonight, we were simply a mother and daughter who'd spent a quiet Saturday together, working in the garden and enjoying the changing season. It was enough. It was more than enough. It was everything.